It's not a joke. It's a real thing. I actually clicked the link. Apparently, it's really big in the UK. So it's good to see that old men have been way ahead of the fashion for quite some time.
No, they're for girls.
They're for girls. Why would guys don't need those? We just grow our own. So,
well, and the UK is where they go on natural on the legs too.
Oh
right?
No, it's pretty phenomenal. So, in case you ladies or men are looking for something to get your ladies for Christmas, apparently maybe a gift card to the nose hair salon. It's kind of big. I had to look at that like 4 times, like because it was on my phone, and I'm like, are those really like nose hairs? I thought maybe she'd singed her nose or something.
It looks like she was snorting spiders.
Right.
So
that's one of my faves. And then today, unleashed at the Texas State Fair, Oreo beer.
that's very patriotic.
Way to ruin an Oreo.
That's the thing. I don't know. Like, I never looked at those 2 things and thought, we should put those 2 things together, right? I mean, like peanut butter and chocolate makes perfect sense, right? All those like accidental, cookie and caramel makes sense. Like some dude at one point, because it's a dude, let's be honest, ladies. I think sometimes we can just assume gender. Some dude was like drinking his, home brew and accidentally dropped an Oreo in it, and was like, magic. And now he's going to be a millionaire. And apparently his name is JM.
We can make them family.
That's right.
Could that be what grew the nose hairs?
That's right. Could be. I just, apparently he makes enough of it to have his own cup. Right? It's not like just a plastic cup they throw some beer and an Oreo in. It's actually a cup that says Oreo beer.
People probably just try it because it sounds gross.
Hashtag most famous beer pong game.
That's right. That's right. Hors d'oeuvre and appetite. And dessert in one beverage. So anyway, those are the 2 that I found. I thought we'd keep it kind of light and relaxed. So nose hair and cookies in your beer. For it is with your heart that you believe that you are justified. We talked about this last week. In the mouth, for which you profess your faith and you're saved. And we talked about the idea of, what's kind of on the inside with your heart. You're justified. It shows the true status of what you believe to God. And ultimately, your heart provides God with the evidence. Because the only one who can see your heart is God, right? So all of the evidence of what you truly believe is in your heart. And the reason that the Bible then says that with your mouth you profess and it saves you is that your mouth provides the evidence of your heart to you. So for a lot of people, one of the things they don't understand is that the honesty of your heart comes out in your mouth, but not typically when you're talking to somebody else, but only when you're talking to yourself, right? When you're being honest with yourself, when you're alone, when you're frustrated, when you say things under your breath, that's the honesty of your heart pouring out. And so your heart really is what professes you. And happy children. Tell me yours.
I come here to create.
Please, I'll keep going. If you could just turn the music. Speaking of my honesty coming out of my heart. Anyway, so we talked about that last week, and then we ended with the verse that everyone who calls out under the name of the Lord will be saved. So this week we're going to take a look at the next verse. It says, "How then can they call on the one that they have not believed in?" So now remember, the Bible says everybody who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And now it says, how do they then call on the name of somebody that they haven't believed in? How do they believe in one who they've never heard of? And how do they hear without someone preaching to them? So Paul is not looking for answers to these questions. These are rhetorical questions. Okay. But it does bring forth one of the more troubling words in all of faith, really, at this point in time in our lives, right? And that's the word of evangelism. Okay? It's a troubling word when you use the term evangelist, when you talk about evangelism, because we've really killed it. We have killed the essence of what it's supposed to be. How can they do anything if they've not been informed of the truth? And we look a lot of times at that word and we say, hey, you know what, hey, so-and-so is an evangelist, or hey, there's an evangelist coming to town. And most of us kind of go, okay. Like, what? How much money are they going to take from everyone? Like, what's their plan? Because we just killed it. We killed the whole concept of it in the 70s and 80s by mislabeling these people who went on TVs, all across our country, and were awful. And the point of all of this is to sort of, spark the evangelist's heart in all of us. That's the goal of this. If you haven't seen that movie, you totally should have. But the idea that it's sort of meant to spark, what is it that we're doing? How do they hear? How do they know if they don't hear? How do they understand it if it hasn't been explained to them? And how can they believe in God if they don't even know He's there? And the only way to tell them that He's there is to preach, is to get the word out. And so he brings that forth in the next verse where he says, how can anyone preach unless they're sent? As is written, beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And at this point he's saying, listen, how can we have preachers, how can we have things being said when we aren't really preparing people, when we aren't sending people, and we aren't doing all these things? Because he says, listen, church, you have to do something. We can sit here and complain and whine and cry all we want. We can do all this stuff about this and that. But if you're not going to get out and tell people, and at this point he's still comparing Israel to the Gentiles, but he says Israel had an obligation to tell. Israel had the obligation to go be my evangelists. And like I said, it's a term that we don't like. It's a term that has sort of, reached kind of a caricature. We also have, methodologies for evangelism in this country, right? We try to make it as easy as possible. It's kind of like a hydroxy cut, right? We go out of our way to like, hey, look, you don't have to diet or move. Take 5 of these and you're gonna look awesome, right? What's the new one now? Liposculpture. Have you guys heard the radio ads for that? I know Carmichael Dave pushes it huge on 1140, but apparently they can go in now and take someone that looks like me and make them look like awesome, right? Because apparently they will the ad is that they can go in now and they can expose all of your muscles, apparently, by like moving other fatty parts around and like making you look awesome. So they take all your fat and they sculpt it.
Walk in flabby, walk out ripped.
Right, and have really weird conversations for the next month. Right? Like, hey, how you doing? Bro, weren't you like crazy fat yesterday? Right? Well, awesome. I got bit by a bee 18 years ago, and finally got the medication I needed. Right? Because how do you have these conversations, right? Like you walk out, you're like, "What's up, ladies?" And they're like, "Dude, you're that fat old guy." No. Yeah. Hollywood makeup design. But yeah, I mean, it's like that now, where we have this idea that we sort of don't have to do anything, that we can just go out of our way to make it as easy as possible. So we have all these methodologies for evangelism. We say, here, go ask these 2 questions and people will find Jesus. We say, here, set up a tent and people will find Jesus. We say, here, put a tract on the back of a toilet in a truck stop and people will find Jesus. And I don't know why I went back of a toilet in a truck stop. South. But the idea is that, we have this idea that, if you just pass out these pamphlets, people are going to get saved. And that's, Paul's talking about genuine preaching of the word, living it out, showing people, talking, caring for people, and he says, how can we do this? Evangelism, and spreading the word of God is the work of the church, right? I really want to buy that book, by the way. The idea that we have this role to play, we have this part to play in this tremendous story is such a blessing, But we only have this part to play because Israel refused to do its part. And one of the things that really, like you said, I think this whole part of Romans is very timely for where we're at as a country, I think, and where we're at as Christians in our community, where we're at as Christians in our political landscape, where we're at as Christians in our social landscape. Because he says, but not all the Israelites accepted the good news. For Isaiah says, Lord, who has believed our message? And in 17, consequently, faith comes from hearing, and hearing the message. And the message is heard through the word about Christ. Okay, so he makes that connection where he says faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. So he says consequentially, right? He says, although the Israelites heard, not all accepted. We know that, right? I mean, we've all read some of our Old Testament, right? Chances are good if you've only read one chapter, you've seen Israel both obey and disobey, right? And faith comes from, the part of this passage that I think is quite interesting from where we're at right now, is it says that faith comes from hearing the message. And the message is heard through the word of Christ. And then going back to rhetorical question, well, what is the message then? You know, what is the message that we're preaching? What is it we're asking? What is it we're trying to share? What is it we're trying to win people to? You know, my friend Paul always says that what you win people with is what you win them to. It's the easiest way for me to always just sort of quantify the idea that if we're winning people to smoke and lights and, you know, glamour and glitz and cheesy, easy, you know, realities and zero challenge in the way that we're taught to think, and we're winning them to this, and we're winning people to health by a hydroxy cut, then that's ultimately what we're winning them to. If we win people to this idea that, you know, you shouldn't have to work for it, it should be simple, it's easy, don't worry about it, no stress, then that's ultimately where you're winning them to. And so what happens when the stress comes along? What happens when they realize it's not as easy as taking, you know, that morning spiritual medication and being okay? You know, what happens when things get hard? What happens when, you know, friends deal with tragedy? You know, and you know, one of the things I use my Bible class as sort of an experiment every week. It's kind of like a petri dish for my entertainment, and you know, and so I'm always throwing stuff in there, see what happens. And you know, we got into this discussion today, a couple days ago, about dealing with tragedy and God's will. Right? I don't know how I feel about God's will in this church. You know, and we were talking about God's will, and so the kids were constantly, you know, they're like, well, if it happens, it's God's determined will. And I said, okay, so someone walks up to you and says, I lost my sister, I lost my brother, I lost my family in the fire. Your answer then is God's will, right? It has to be, right? If that's what you believe. And watching the kids just sit there and go, well, it is. And I said, it is. So you're going to go ahead and tell them that? And they said, well, and so, you know, they find the ultimate cop-out, right? Well, just because it's the truth doesn't mean I have to say it that way. I'm like, yeah, it does. If it's the truth, it has to be said directly, right? So let's talk. And I think they were so mad at me by the end of class because all of their answers were so dumb, right? And I would just go back to them and go, well. And they're like, stop it! I don't know what to say. And I say, you know, well, luckily that's why you're young, you've got to figure it out. That's the point of this class, is to go through these steps. But I think when we run into stuff that's easy, when we run into stuff that's hard, and we run into stuff that doesn't fit, and we run into stuff that doesn't work, and we run into stuff that we have to fight for. You know, when you're talking to somebody who's gone through a tragedy, and you're like, I don't know. You know, for some of us, we just throw our hands in the air and go, this God thing's just not working out. It doesn't make any sense. I'm out of here. Because it doesn't answer the hard questions, and that's one of my favorites. You know, and you know, we miss the point that, you know, we have to come to grips with what we understand the message to be, and we've got to also accept the fact that things are difficult, things are hard. And when we talk about acceptance, you know, we are in a weird spot right now, and you know, the primary point of all of this is this sort of exchange that Paul puts together at the end, where he says, but I asked, did they not hear? Of course they did, right? Because he just says that not all of them accepted it, right? So he says, did they not hear? Well, of course they did. Of course they heard. Their voice has gone out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. So guess what? Everybody's heard, right? Is what he's saying. The message that Israel had. We're not talking about the New Testament at this point. We're talking about the message Israel had. Is that his voice has gone out. He says, did they not hear? Well, of course they did. The message has gone out to the ends of the earth. Okay, that covers it. Right? At that point, we were talking about all of it. And then he says, and I ask again, did Israel not understand? So first of all, he says, look, did they hear? Yes, they heard. Did they not understand? I will make you envious by those who are not a nation. I will make you angry by a nation that has no understanding. So now he says, you know, listen, I'm going to change the world through this nation that's not even a nation right now, which at that point in time was the Hebrew slaves, right? I'm going to make this great world-changing entity out of an entity that's not even an entity right now. And it's something that you look at, you mock. You think it's small, it's irrelevant, it's nothing. You know, it doesn't make a difference. They were insignificant people. You know, it's the only way you can say it. I'm going to take and I'm going to make these insignificant, irrelevant people a world-changing nation. That must have, one, for them to hear it at that point when Moses said it, was also probably a little bit okay, right? I'm sure they had a hard time believing it. I'm sure they sat there and went, all right, but I think you're a little off there, coach, right? You know, and the reality is that obviously he did do it, but they did understand. They knew what it meant because they had seen God bring them through that. They you know, the one thing about Israel, while they may forget God and their history, they don't forget their history about themselves, right? They may forget the role God played, but they're really good at their own history, so they know that they were nothing. And then all these tremendous miracles chosen by God, and they came out. And so, you know, their understanding and dismissal of the message, ultimately, that in the end was what their undoing was. Of course they understood. You know, and when you parallel this to us as the church in America, as Christians in this country, the parallels are the same. We've all heard. We all understand. We all know. But we are so distracted. We are so confused. And then he asks another, and then ultimately, here's the response that Isaiah has. Isaiah says, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. So now, God's showing his propensity for enlisting people that didn't even want to be in the army. God's showing his propensity for finding carriers of the message who had no idea, who didn't understand the message, but that in the end, ultimately, he revealed it to them, so he was able to now see the truth. So now he's going around and he's pulling these people out of nowhere. And he says, listen, this is who is going to carry it. And one of the questions is interesting, is do you ever find yourself hearing the word of God, the message from someone with more heart for the message than most Christians you know? And they're not Christians? It's one of the weirdest things for me still today. And I see it in lots of places. You know, people who genuinely care, people who are philanthropic by nature but are not Christians. And I've always found that to be one of the greatest challenges to the way that I think. And like I said, I know that there are parts of my life where I find myself becoming more stuck in the mud. But there are lots of parts of my life, especially the way that I think socially, and I think, you know, community-wise, that I'm getting less and less stuck. And one of those areas has always been listening to people who seem to have the right message, even though I feel like they are the wrong vessel. Right? I sort of feel like it should be us as the church saying we should care about our fellow man, we should be out there caring for them, we should be out there looking out for them, we should be out there making sure that we're giving to people who are in need, we should make sure we're doing all this stuff. Yet I find myself so often surprised by the entity that I have called home most of my entire life, which is the church, raging against it. You know, asking them to not be cared for. You know, give them time, they'll figure it out for themselves. Except that's not in any way a Christian perspective. But we see ourselves so going that way. You know, I had a conversation with a gentleman last night who was like, you know, we need to stop letting, you know, he kind of wants to, and which I appreciate greatly because he'd be great at it, but he wants to take over the leadership of the football program next year. And, but one of his things is, I really feel like we need to change our policy and not let these people in until they can put a down payment, you know, a large down payment on their bill to get in. And that sort of entered us into a conversation, and you know, where I said, well, but you're going to get a lot of kids that kind of need this. It's kind of their home. And he goes, well, I feel like the parents aren't paying because they know they don't have to. And I said, sure. Well, what does that do with the kid? Right? You know, and we were going back, you know, I just told him, I hear what you're saying 100%, but that has nothing to do with the child. That has everything to do with how you view the parent, which I get. Also understand that side too. But you know, we were going back and forth, and you know, and I said, in the end, ultimately, what do you think is the Christian thing require they do their part, which is fine. There's basis for that. You can find that in Scripture too. I said, or care for the kid first. You can find basis for that in Scripture too. So I said, what do you think is the Christian thing to do? And and like I said, going back to the conversation I have with the kids, not all questions are quite as cut and dry as you think. You can find scriptural basis for that. Work, do your part, be responsible, provide. Ultimately, 100% you can find that. I said, but in the end, you're asking me to apply scriptures to them. I'm saying, which one do you think we should do? I'm not going to worry about, Joe and Susie Smith. What do you think we should do? And it really, we had a great conversation. We talked for, 20 minutes while I watched a phenomenal football game, which isn't always the truth of youth football. But, it leads to, hey, let's discuss this again when we get to the, have a board meeting next week. Let's get to this. Let's keep this going. Because I'm not saying that your side doesn't have merit. But in the end, it's, so many times I have these conversations where I hear people talking, and then I hear people who are part of my tribe, right? Christendom, talking, and I'm like, shh, 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 right? And most of them have microphones and television contracts, and I sit there and I'm just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you talking? Almost anybody who is a national personality who professes some sort of root foundation in faith. And I think, I understand, but are you a Christian first, or are you a Democrat first? Are you a Christian first, or are you a Republican first? Because if you're a Christian first, maybe don't talk like that. Maybe don't blast your enemies. Maybe don't blast your opponents, ridicule people. I hear more heart in people who have a heart for film, for the sort of philanthropic endeavors. And it's always been hard for me. And that's what the answer of Isaiah is that I have found those who didn't seek me. I've revealed myself to those who didn't ask. Because in the end, he says, listen, Israel, all day long I held out my hands to a disobedient and obstinate people. I'm pretty sure those are probably the last combination of words you ever want to be called in your life. Obedient and obstinate. Which means disobedient and obstinate. Not only are you disobedient, you're stubborn about it and you won't change. You don't care. All you care about is yourself. And one of the things that's interesting here is I sort of feel like the tone is not frustration with God, it's just fact. All day long I held up my hands to a disobedient and obstinate people. So guess what? I'm giving it to somebody else. I'm moving it to somebody else. I'm going to find people, who are going to take and who are going to listen. And I think that's one of the things that I see across our country right now. When I listen and I watch and I see the trends and I see the way things are moving, and I think to myself, we are rapidly moving toward the church, moving up and out of the church and falling into the hands of a different tribe of people. And I think it's really hard because we're sitting there saying, no. We're the chosen. We are the carriers of the word. And God's going, that's great, but they have the message. And I think it's a real challenge for us to find ways to give this week. And one of the applications is, to really work towards finding somebody in your life that you can give to who's in need this week. Specifically find somebody. Don't just happenstance across it. Don't just be surprised it happened. But absolutely go out of your way to find somebody. We're entering a season right now where there are going to be a lot of people who are in need. There's a lot of fathers and mothers out there right now during this season who want to give their kids a good Christmas and aren't going to be able to. And we've been blessed, Lisa and I have been blessed enough that our kids have been given plenty of things that they can destroy and lose by January for years. We have absolutely given our best to the landfills across America, on Christmas morning. But I can't imagine what it would be like to be able to give nothing. And I know for a lot of us we go, if you give them love. That's exactly what Marcus wants to open on Christmas morning. Oh, a hug from my dad. Woohoo. Thank you, Jesus. The one time he prefers socks. Socks are up.
Big nuts.
Right, take the socks, Dad. But no, the idea is that I can't imagine, you know, and this is the time of year where people are absolutely 100% going to take advantage of that fact too. But that's not your problem. You know, I mean, Marcus and I had a real long talk about this one night where, you know, I think it was a couple of Christmases ago, we gave a Christmas tree, went and bought a Christmas tree for a guy who was out front looking for stuff because of his kid. And Marcus is like, Dad, do you really think those people are poor? And I said, who cares? That's not my problem. My problem is not their intention. My job is to give, right? And, you know, one of the things, I mean, obviously working in a school, I have an easy crop to harvest there. At least at working in a school, easy crop to harvest. There's plenty of need amongst kids. Some of you guys, it's a little harder. But the challenge is to really go out and find somebody to give to this week before we come back next week. Find somebody to give something to. And don't just say, you know, I gave my prayers. Prayers are great, appreciate it. Actually go to them and give them something. Find a way to give something away and just try to be that message, you know, to people, especially as we're entering a time when, man, our country needs us to care for each other. And needs our communities, needs our cities, needs our families, our churches, to lead the way in producing, you know, kindness. And it does. It goes a long way. You know, and I know that all of us, you know, we don't have limitless things to do something, and then, you know, but we do have enough we can give something. You know, we also want to encourage others to do something through testimony. So I'm always a big fan of the quiet, humble giver, but sometimes being somebody who gives to somebody and then letting other people know, hey, you know what, I did this, you know, I'm pretty excited about it, I feel pretty great about it. That's not a bad thing. Because sometimes it makes the other person go, oh, yeah, I probably should. You know, and it starts to spur them on. You know, and then when it comes to prayers, pray each morning for your community and your church. You know, and one of the reasons that praying matters is it centers what you're thinking. It centers you on something. You know, when you get up in the morning, you just say, you know what, God, just give me a chance to see what this person needs to hear. Give me a chance to see what's going on in my community. Maybe give me a chance to see the beggar I've been stepping over every morning. And I've been stepping over because I just didn't see him. It wasn't I was being rude. Just sometimes we walk right by people. And we don't see what's going on with them. You know, and that's why we center our prayers in the morning on our community and our church. You know, find somebody to give to and find a way to share that testimony. You know, one of the ways to share that testimony would be to just, you know, let other people know in the church that you did it. You know, send a text, put it on the church Facebook page, stuff like that, just to say, hey, look, you know, I found somebody to give something away to. And I remember I was in a church years ago where they gave out $10 gift cards to start, $10 Starbucks cards. I'm like, just go give this away. I'm like, you know what, that's great. Give something of yours away. Right? It's not hard to give away something that somebody gave you to give away. You know, but find a way to give something away this week. And just use it as an application to go make a difference, because we're entering a time now where it's more important than ever. So I'm going to make sure I do it too. I'm going to make sure that I find a way this, you know, a number of times this week to let you guys know about great opportunities, you know, to do things. So let's receive our offering as we close this morning, and then let you guys get out into our beautiful fall. I'm so glad it's here. So Father God, we just thank you so much for this morning. We pray for the offering. We pray your blessing over the money that comes in this morning. God, we pray your opportunities that come before us this week, that we see a chance to give something away, and not try to be something so generic, but something that's tangible, that we know that, hey, we're giving of ourselves in this, we're giving of our resources in this to somebody. We pray for that opportunity this week. Amen. All right. You guys are free to move about the building.